Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is 11 pre-21st century prog metal bands that deserved to be way bigger. So, here are 11 pre-2000s prog metal bands that deserve to be way bigger. Progressive metal has evolved into an incredibly popular and diverse subgenre over the past 40 years, with countless bands putting their own spin on the core concept of combining vintage prog rock trickiness with heavy metal toughness. In that time, dozens of acts such as Fate's Warning, Queensrÿche, Opeth, Dream Theater, Between the Buried and Me, Mastodon, and Tool have become household names for fans of the style. In fact, even people who have never heard of the term progressive metal have probably heard of those artists. Unfortunately, that also means there's an equal amount of significantly underappreciated prog metal groups that should be more widely known and revered, especially if they came onto the scene in the 80s or 90s. Take the following 11 bands, for example. Some of them are bigger than others, and some of them are still active, but they've nonetheless flown under the radar far too often and failed to get the love they deserve. So we are going to start out with Vanden Plas. I was actually supposed to see these guys at Prog Power one year, and they had troubles with their visas, so I didn't get to see them, and it's disappointing because they are incredible. German troupe Vanden Plas will be celebrating their 40th anniversary in 2025, and despite putting out one superb sequence after another, especially 2006's Christ Zero, they're not talked about enough. For one thing, frontman Andy Kuntz has always been among the most distinguished voices in the genre, just as guitarist Stephen Lill and former keyboardist Gunther Verno made for one hell of a team across Vanden Plas' discography. They frequently tap into engaging and inventive concepts, too, that incorporate themes and topics ranging from injustice and theology to paranormal occurrences. At times, they even stretch their ambitious storytelling across two LPs. Most importantly, they've rarely faltered from being able to balance emotionally resonant and catchy rockers such as Christ Zero, the Empyrean Equation of the Long-Lost Things, expansive and complex jams like Inside of Your Head and Frequency, and wide-ranging timbres like Days of Thunder and Vision 4, Misery, Affection, Prelude. Really, there's no reason why they shouldn't be dominating the prog metal conversation. Next, we get to Superior, another standout ensemble from Germany with even less name recognition, admittedly far less material, is Superior. They lasted 15 years, from 1992 to 2007, and released only 3 studio collections: Fan Favorite Behind from 1996, Unique in 1998, and Ultimo Ratio in 2002. Nevertheless, they've accomplished more than enough to warrant continued acknowledgement, yet aside from the most hardcore prog metal lovers, they've largely been forgotten. In a nutshell, Superior kind of combined the bleak atmospheres of Fate's Warning and the ballad craftsmanship of Queensrÿche with a generally gruffer aesthetic. Tomorrow's Eve and Nothing showcase that well, whereas Not With Me, Stop, Reflections, and My Fate highlight how experimental or commercially appealing, but still idiosyncratic and striving, they could be. Far from being mere one-trick ponies, Superior always took themselves and their unfairly limited fan base to new places, even incorporating the fast-paced eccentricities that Devin Townsend would become known for. We move on to Lemure Voice. Hailing from the Netherlands, Lemure Voice issued only 2 records, 1996's Insights and 1999's aptly titled Divided, before deciding to disband as they were working on their 3rd album. As their official statement read, "We all feel that we are mutually obstructing our personal creative paths. Therefore, we have to separate in order to continue making the music to which we aspire, for you and for ourselves." Thus, they weren't given much of a chance to break through, but in hindsight, it's clear that they already had the talent and vision to leave their mark. From the opening moments of intuition from Insights, Lemure Voice excel at blending traditional metal trademarks with the keyboard-driven neo-prog lusciousness of early Marillion and IQ. Other highlights from that disc include the instrumental piano ode Celestial Haze and the multifaceted epic Alone. Afterward, Divided saw them venture into Mr. Bungle-esque experimentations via irregular rhythms and peculiar textures of Divided, Childhood Facade, and their signature take on Michael Jackson's Beat It. Although they only created 2 LPs, the Dutch band deserved their flowers for what they've brought to 90s prog metal. We move on to one of my absolute favorites on this list, Psychotic Waltz. I absolutely adore Psychotic Waltz. And as great as their music is, it's Devin Graves' just otherworldly voice that absolutely mesmerizes me, because when Psychotic Waltz ended and he moved on to Dead Soul Tribe, I followed right along. And of course they came back with a new album a few years back, and it's like they never left. Anyway, let's get into it. Psychotic Waltz are one of America's oldest progressive metal acts, having begun in 1988, disbanded in 1996, and officially reunited in 2010. Along the way, they've shared the stage with major ensembles such as Emperor, the Dillinger Escape Plan, Nevermore, and Symphony X. All the while, they sustained their quality and distinctiveness. Their initial run from 1990's A Social Grace to 1996's Bleeding, I cannot say enough good things about. Absolutely brilliant, fantastic, amazing album. Was quite impressive, with almost every LP being the favorite of the bunch for certain fans. There was a slightly thrashy Voivod meets King Diamond meets Iron Maiden vibe to their earliest stuff, successor Freak Show, but with some intricate twists and turns, with the follow-ups leaning into more accessible territories like Only Time and Bleeding. As for their 2020 comeback, The God-Shaped Void, it essentially acted as an ideal and modernized compromise between the two phases. All the Bad Men, Sisters of Dawn, proving just how worthy of attention they remain. So yeah, definitely check out anything they've ever done. That being said, also check out Dead Soul Tribe, a more macabre and darker version of the ideas that were put forth on the last couple of Psychotic Waltz albums, including Bleeding. We move on to Threshold. Whoa, Threshold. Damian Wilson, I discovered him through Arion. He sang in Threshold for a little while. Absolutely incredible. What a tremendous voice. Threshold, granted England's Threshold, have released 12 studio records over the last 32 years, are more recognizable than many of the other bands on this list, due in part to the fact that they're still going. Nevertheless, they should be as big as their biggest genre brethren, particularly because they managed to rebound from numerous lineup changes, including shuffling through multiple lead vocalists, with each era offering something special. Speaking of singers, former frontman Damian Wilson's unmistakable voice was a big reason why their initial output, Sanity's End and Virtual Isolation, stood out. In a reductive sense, it's what might happen if Robert Plant sang over a hybrid of Dream Theater and Megadeth, with soaring hooks, zany keyboard passages, gruff guitar work, and frantic rhythms cementing their formula. They basically stayed true to that original sound ever since, with new singers Andrew McDermott and, most recently, Glenn Morgan inherently adding new shades to their musical palette via the former's gentler arena rock timbre, like Critical Mass, and the latter's operatic arid tone as in Silenced. There's a treasure trove of great Threshold material to discover, so dive in as soon as you can. And I agree. Just grab an album, and it's not going to sound like the other album. That's just the way it works. It's fantastic. We move on to L'Enfer. Although it's very enjoyable, L'Enfer's debut LP, 1996's Towers of February, merely hinted at the progressive and mythical tendencies they developed with 1999's Zero Poems onward. Since then, though, up until their final collection, 2016's The Code Inherited, the German Fivesome absolutely nailed their rugged yet regal aesthetic. Be it the appealing angst and majestic keyboard-driven sophistication of Turn the Tide, the theatrical hyperactivity of Shades of Black, or the alternative textures and luscious melodies of Brave New Men and Idiopathic Discretion, L'Enfer cleverly incorporated influences such as King Crimson, Testament, Rush, and Disturbed into a highly commendable concoction. Like Threshold, they've gone through several singers as well, including Steven Zorner, Tobias Althammer, and Nuno Miguel de Barros Fernandez, which only adds to how expansive and enticing their catalog is overall. We're now at Royal Hunt, a Danish band that put out album after album. Cannot say enough good things about them. Definitely check out Paradox, just good stuff. As one of Denmark's longest running metal troops, Royal Hunt earned distinction for implementing medieval, folk, and symphonic touches, among others, into their creative chemistry. As such, theirs is an especially varied sound that somehow they managed to uphold from 1992's Land of Broken Hearts to 2022's Dystopia Part 2. Even so, they've rarely mentioned in the same breath as other prog neoclassical power metal groups such as Symphony X, Camelot, Stradivarius, and Sabotage. Their first decade was extremely engaging, with 1997's continuous suite Paradox ranking as one of the best prog metal albums of the 90s, thanks to gems such as the densely dramatic River of Pain and the sing-along allure of ballad Message to God. From there, and even in the face of, and you guessed it, dealing with a revolving door vocalist, they remain mostly consistent amidst adapting to present-day expectations. See Half Past Loneliness and Principles of Paradox. Honestly, the Dystopia duo might be two of their greatest works, both because of how masterfully they fit together and because of their individual strengths, ranging from the symphonic aggressiveness of Scream of Anger to the classical elegance of The Missing Page Intermission 1. How many other veteran acts are still producing top-tier material? And we go to Atheist. Atheist, wow. 4 solid albums. My favorite, however, Elements. Still love it to this day. I liked what happened in the kind of prog death metal arena at that time with Spheres from Pestilence and Elements from Atheist. There was just so much interesting things going on. If you ask 100 prog metal experts to name a 90s band that broke new ground by blending death metal and jazz fusion, most of them would immediately cite Cynic. Without a doubt, 1993's focus was revolutionary. However, it's important to note that another American project, Atheist, who actually formed in 1987, were right there with them. They started out strong in the 1990s with a terrific trilogy, 1990's Piece of Time, 1991's Unquestionable Presence, and 1993's Elements, that cumulatively showcased Kelly Schaefer's incredibly brutal singing alongside inventive and demanding arrangements such as Room with a View, An Incarnation's Dream, and Samba Brisa. Yet, like Psychotic Waltz, they then went on a prolonged hiatus before returning with a stellar comeback record in 2010's Jupiter and a largely fresh lineup. Schaefer stayed in the captain's chair, though, and his presence, in conjunction with the capabilities of his new and returning bandmates, allowed Jupiter to sound like a proper successor to Elements. See Fictitious Glide and Tortoise the Titan. If you're looking for an even angrier take on what Cynic does, Atheist totally fits the bill. And now we're at The Gathering, and I'll go with that. The Gathering are amazing, especially when they had Anika. Another criminally underappreciated Dutch group, and likely the most stylistically flexible one here, is The Gathering. Nighttime Birds, just Mandalion. I know those are older albums, but those two stay with me. While the male-fronted gothic doom focus of their 2 first LPs was enjoyable, it wasn't until the one-of-a-kind voice of Anneke van Giersbergen, who's played with Anathema and Devin Townsend, started steering the ship on 1995's Mandalion that The Gathering started charting progressive aisles. Between then and 2006's Home, she brought angelic purity and an overwhelming catchiness to many of their heaviest and most stylishly nuanced numbers. See In Motion No. 1 and Nighttime Birds, as they admittedly began veering into alternative alt-rock, Amity, and In Between. In 2009's The West Pole, Van Giersbergen was replaced by the equally capable but commendably different Silje Vergland. Despite maintaining the vibe of that Giersbergen era, the Vergland era has nonetheless gotten markedly fierce from time to time too, as in A Constant Run, I Can See 4 Miles, and Grounded. No matter where you are in The Gathering's discography, you'll be rewarded with eloquent singing and powerful arrangements. And even though it's only their earliest LPs that fit firmly within the metal sphere, those records alone should have placed The Gathering beneath a bigger spotlight. If you're into bands that will evolve and change and surprise you on each album. A lot of people aren't. They kind of like their comfort food, but The Gathering is a band that will do 1 or 2 albums that kind of complement each other and then shift totally into another direction. We move on to Conception. Hell yeah, can't go wrong with Roy Khan. The Norwegian quartet have been around since 1989, and as with a couple of previously mentioned artists, they remained prolific throughout the 1990s, issuing 4 albums before a prolonged breakup forced fans to wait nearly 25 years for their 5th collection, 2020 State of Deception. Many Conception followers argue that 1995's In Your Multitude is their magnum opus. Kind of hard to argue. And we recently included it alongside Royal Hunt's Paradox as one of the best prog metal albums of the 90s because of how much it feels like an amazing hybrid of Dio, Queensrÿche, Living Colour, and Fate's Warning. Look no further than Retrospect and Carnal Comprehension to hear why that is. Despite not being on the same level as In Your Multitude, their other works are well worth seeking out for ability to synthesize evocative songwriting. See Silent Crying and Hold On, with in-your-face complex anarchy, like Water Confines and No Rewind. Sure, they generally stick to a very specific recipe, but it's one that far more people should be blasting from their stereos as often as possible. And that's a unique thing when it comes to Conception. After those 4 albums, Roy Khan had left and he joined the Florida metal outfit Camelot. And he did a sizable amount of albums with Camelot. He started out with Siege Perilous. He left after, I think it was Poetry for the Poison. Decades of wonderful music he did, and then he came back. It's like they didn't miss a step. But if you like the musicianship, especially a Tor and the guys did in Concept, check out 2 releases of a band called Arc. Tor created the band Arc, and he got Jorn Lande to sing on those albums, the self-titled debut and the follow-up, Burn the Sun, and those albums are tremendous. We move on to Mekong Delta. If there's one lesson to learn from this list, it's that Germany has spawned a lot of relatively unsung genre acts, and Mekong Delta warrants acclaim as much as any of the others we've looked at. Aside from their 10-year break between 1996's Pictures at an Exhibition and 2007's Lurking Fear, they've routinely pumped out a particularly appealing brand of prog, tech, extreme, and thrash metal since their 1987 self-titled LP. They too have gone through a fair share of singers and instrumentalists at the time. Consequently, there are definitely some distinctive elements that separate, say, 1990's elaborate yet visceral 8-part Dances of Death from the classical depths of 1994's Allegro, Morm's Victory, and the virtuosic musicianship and adventurousness of 2014's Overture. Even their 12th and latest outing, 2020's Tales of a Future Past, finds them stretching their artistic chops by using 4 landscape tracks as the glue that binds riff-driven gems like Mental Entropy and the stately acoustic odes like A Farewell to Eternity. It's a tremendously resourceful tactic that takes Tales of a Future Past to a new level and exemplifies why Mekong Delta may only gotten better as the years have passed. And there you go. That is our list of 11 pre-2000s prog metal bands that deserve to be way bigger. Thanks for joining me in the video. See you in the next one.